Right, looks like we're recording.
We are now live, Chair.
Thank you, Kirsty.
Okay.
Are there any other people waiting yet to come in?
I'll sort all that out in the background, don't worry.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I'm hoping that Caroline Jones is still with us. I'll give that a moment.
Chair, I'll let you know as soon as I let her in.
Thank you.
Hi, Heidi. Are you okay?
I'm good, thank you. I'm just letting you know I forwarded the invite to Caroline because I couldn't see her on the invite list. So
Okay.
I just wanted to make Councillor Dickinson aware that I haven't sent the invite to Caroline, so hopefully she'll join.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi.
Hi, for any members of the public that are watching, we're just starting the meeting slightly later tonight because we've had technical issues in the background. So we're just waiting for a couple of officers to join the meeting, then we'll start the meeting. Thank you. Caroline's joining, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Okay. I don't really want to repeat the introductions again. Safe to say that they have been done and the due process has taken place. So, Caroline, hopefully that's the end of the jinx. Did you want to continue? I mean, how long have you got before you need to go?
Got about 5 minutes, Chair, so I'm conscious some people might want to ask questions, but I'd just refer members of the panel to the case studies because that's where you actually really get the context and the richness of some of the really bad things that are happening in some of the households we've come across anyway. I mean, in case study A, this man's really poorly and he's got an EPC rating of G. That house should not have been let out at all. In case B, this is another energy one, but he had unsafe electrics, no hot water at all, water being let in, and his house was drafted because the doors didn't fit properly. C, no gas certificate. That's an absolute no-no, and as you all know, in terms of letting out, and it goes on and on. So I don't want to take time, obviously, because you can read those at your leisure if you've not already. But obviously, I'm mindful that some people may want to ask some questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Sue, you've got your hand up. I'll let you kick off. Sorry, Councillor Holsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Caroline, it was a quick question. It's very clear from your report that houses with F and G bands for EPC ratings are illegal to be let out to tenants. Given that, looking at the stats that you've given us all, quite a lot of these houses fall into that category. Are prosecutions ever taken out against these landlords, or does that rely on the tenant being prepared to effectively help with the prosecution, and they're then so frightened that they may be evicted that they can't?
I think Councillor Holsworth, there's a bit of a mix going on there because it does depend on the tenant's willingness to actually support any kind of prosecution. And the case A, unfortunately, he died before we got to that point. We were trying to work very hard with him to encourage him to do that. And he was reluctant, and we believe it was because he was getting really cheap rent from the landlord and he wouldn't have got that anywhere else. So I think it's very individual, and it just depends on how frightened people are. But obviously, if they do come forward and say, we want to take action, then we're either referring them over to the Kirklees Law Centre or they get support from Fusion, which is the charity I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask about the linking up with services, because some of the case studies are so desperate. You feel like they must have come into services, in contact with services prior to getting to the stage that you're at with, you know, when they get to CAB. So is there nothing that we can do to sort of highlight things at an earlier stage to help people to, you know, to prevent, I mean, for example, that man dying before anything further could be done about his dire situation?
I think, Councillor, one of the things that is to my benefit and sometimes disbenefit is that we're often seen as the service to refer to by many of the emergency services and quite a lot of our partners. I think the minute we get it, we make sure that we connect with other partners, and some of them are on this meeting tonight, to try and get the best outcome for them. But I think what's happening is the information is coming straight to us, and then we're dealing with it as we see fit and making sure that there is a connected plan for that individual and that household, whereas possibly we can. And it takes time. Sometimes people will also, you know, get nervous in the middle of the journey. We have to back off for a bit and then go back to them. But wherever we can, we do our best to work closely, particularly with council colleagues as well. And housing options and all sorts of other sort of sections within the council to get the best resolution.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I work as a gas safe registered engineer, so I'm very much aware of things like what happens when gas certificates are incorrectly issued or not issued at all, in fact. In my trade magazines, there's a report every single time, one way or another, about how someone that is usually the health and safety executive basically do a number on the person who's not been doing as they should be. So that comes as a comfort, but it does beg a general question when you're getting a rising caseload of how often and how effectively enforcement is introduced. And I think that might be a question that goes well beyond what the CAB are able to offer as a service on this particular one. But the other very quick question I do have and it's a wider one, is what is the minimum energy EPC rating for a house for rental? Because F&G is clearly unacceptable. Is it E and above?
I think so. But what I have done, I'm not a technical advisor. I'm just a person who sits over these wonderful people. What I have done, Chair, to help members is I've put a link in the chat which shows you the renting responsibilities of a landlord, and that goes into much more detail about what the holding the deposit and what they have to do with it, putting it in the right scheme, what requirements they've got. Like the gas safety certificate is an absolute must in terms of a primary responsibility. But at your leisure, you're all welcome to have a look at that, and it'll go into more detail. And it does talk about the EPC ratings, but I think it is D and above.
Yes, thank you for that. Two people with quick questions, and I think after that we're going to have to let you go. I'm so sorry. Heidi, and then Heidi Waters, and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I just wanted to give reassurance to members about the council's involvement, but before I do, I just feel I should flag that I do have an interest in that I am the Vice Chair of Citizens Advice Calderdale, so I have a very close working professional relationship with Caroline and her colleagues, and I felt I should flag that before I say what I'm going to say. The Citizens Advice and the Council do work very closely together. Caroline has mentioned the frontline service that we have through Housing Options, and that's Nicola Kaiser-Forrest and her team that lead on that. They also engage very closely with Richard Armitage and his team, who do a lot of work in the private rented sector and can look at the support that can be made available to those people who are having problems with their tenancy. But most importantly, I think, is the relationship with environmental health. And our colleague Diane is here this evening, Diane Marsh from Environmental Health. And just to reassure that environmental health, who have the powers to take action against landlords, do so. We have had a number of cases where environmental health and the housing teams have worked closely together along with citizens' advice and the affected tenants and residents to try and address some of the poor housing conditions that people live in. So I thought it was really important to give that context. We do work as a team, as it was, across both the council and our partner agencies to make sure that we support residents. But I think, as Caroline has said, it's very difficult sometimes for tenants who are living in homes to take that decision to take action against their landlord. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heidi. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just really quickly. The stats that you've given in the report, Caroline, are they don't include unregistered landlords, do they, or do they, in the private rented sector?
I couldn't tell you that in detail, Councillor Smith, because I just draw this data out of a massive warehouse, and so I'd have to go back and check. I just looked for anything that had the tag private sector landlord, and then
right. Oops. Oh no. Right.
Thank you very much.
I just wondered what rights people had if they are in if they're in housing, private sector housing that is unregistered.
Unregistered, yeah.
What rights do the people that have they still got any sort of rights or not?
I'm going to have to come back to you on that, Councillor, because I'm not an advisor. So if you want to write to me, write to me directly, and I'll get answers to those questions for you, and then they can be shared with colleagues in this meeting and beyond, and obviously develop the report. But I couldn't say for sure whether that's actually the case. So if you just drop me an email, I'll respond to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Caroline. I hope I haven't wrecked your evening.
No, it's fine. I'm really sorry, Chair, that I had to leave.
No.
And obviously wanted to be part of this scrutiny because it is very important to all of us. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
Bye for now. I'd like to take a slight step back in my haste and introduce the context of the discussion for this. Just a small section I need to read here for us all. That'll help perhaps make this a little bit clearer for those who might still be a bit vague about it. In March earlier this year, the board considered an item on social housing where the board discussed a range of issues with council officers and 5 social housing providers. The board decided to follow up this with a discussion on the private rented housing sector, which is larger than the social housing sector by about 1,500 properties or so. This is intended to be a broad discussion, recognising that some of the poorest housing in Calderdale is in the private rented sector, as we're hearing already, and some of the most disadvantaged people in the borough live in privately rented properties. So this item will consider the private rented sector supply, the impact of living in poor accommodation on the health of tenants, national government initiatives, including new legislation, for example, relating to no-fault evictions, support to tenants through universal credit, council services to tenants and landlords. The item will also seek to consider the views of landlords. The item will also consider the needs of particular groups, including asylum seekers, refugees, people with disabilities and care leavers. This item is in effect lifting a lid on the issue and having a look inside it. Mark and Bella will prepare a short report after the meeting of the points raised and any conclusions reached. Right, Councillor Clark. I'm so sorry for this upside down meeting, the way it's been going about it. Oh dear. I'd love it if you could.
All right, thank you, Councillor.
Love it if you could introduce this.
It seems a bit belated, really, now.
Well, yeah, I know, but please.
And I think you've made the introduction as to what it's about, really. I must say that I've spent the last few weeks in very interesting meetings with Caroline, etc., and Mike and Bella, and lots of other organisations. What we're thinking is that looking further into the private sector housing is certainly not, it's not a finished project. I think there's so much more to be said, but it's an important aspect of responding to the cost of living crisis, definitely. I have to say that Caroline will only see the really bad ones, you know, the vast majority of landlords are good landlords or moderate landlords, but they're not all bad landlords, I must say that. I think we have to achieve the council priorities, which is about reducing inequalities, the climate emergency, and also the cost of living. We want thriving towns, and those thriving towns have to include a good private rented sector as well as a social housing sector. So everything is, as Caroline said, very important. We do seem to have a bit of discrepancy to how many private rented sector houses there are. We have 14,000. Someone else has had 18,000, and I think Councillor Dickinson said that there were a 1,500 discrepancy between the two, but to me that's 2,000. Anyway, I'll get on. I'll pass it on now to whoever wants to speak about it. I think Heidi is probably the best person to speak to at the moment. Heidi, can I introduce you?
Yes, thank you, if I may, Chair.
Thank you.
The private, with Richard Armitage, who leads on our work around the private rented sector, has been working on a report that I believe has been shared with members for this meeting. But I think in summary, we have to say that the private rented sector is now certainly, whatever the numbers, whether it's 16,000 or slightly more, certainly the private rented sector is now larger than the social housing rented sector in Calderdale, and it has an incredibly important role within the local housing market. But we have seen a real change in terms of some of the challenges around the private rented sector. We are finding that landlords are moving away from some of the lower rental areas. We're finding it particularly difficult to find accommodation for more vulnerable residents in Calderdale and those people who are reliant on landlords who will consider local housing allowance rates. And so we found it a real challenge. And unlike some other areas, our private rented sector in Calderdale is reliant on a lot of smaller landlords. So we don't have particularly large numbers of landlords who have a big portfolio of property. We do have some, but it isn't many. And so it means that it's quite a disparate sector and often quite challenging to engage with. But I think it's really important that we recognise that there are some really good landlords operating in Calderdale, some landlords that really care about the people that they work with, and we have developed some really good relationships. But I think one of the challenges that we've recognised is that we need to engage more effectively with private landlords. I think Diane and her team are very good at that enforcement side of things, but actually we want to try and be more supportive to private landlords and encourage them to support residents and help to maintain tenancies wherever possible and where appropriate. And so we are in the process of recruiting to a private landlord liaison officer post who will do direct work with private landlords to support them in some of the challenges that they have, but also to try and develop those relationships and encourage them to raise standards within the sector, which is a really important point, because as Caroline has already stated, there are a number of our more vulnerable residents are usually living in those poorest accommodation areas. And so we really need to work with landlords to improve the standards that we have within the sector. And within Richard's report, he outlines how we might be able to do that. Richard and his team have been very, very effective in bidding for funding to look at how we make homes warmer and safer within the borough. And actually, Richard and colleagues have been successful in gaining more than £8 million worth of funding to come into Calderdale for the private sector, both owner-occupied and private rented properties, to improve the standards. So we're really trying to be proactive in our work in the private rented sector. But I think it's fair to say it's perhaps the most challenging it has ever been in terms of our work with private landlords. But as I said earlier on, it's really important to remember we're not talking about all landlords, but it's those that we struggle to engage with that perhaps we need to do the most work with. So I think because councillors will have seen the report and had a chance to digest it, we're more than happy to take any questions, because I'm sure there will be questions. But if I can just introduce my colleagues, because I don't want to be reliant on answering all the questions that you might have. So I've already mentioned my colleague Diane from Environmental Health, Nicola, who leads our frontline homelessness service, and Richard from the private sector team. But also in the meeting, we do have colleagues, Julie and Dom from Smart Move, who are a very important organisation who work very closely with private landlords as well. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of them being in the meeting as well. So I'm happy to take any questions now, Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Heidi. That's very helpful. Maybe we'll get a chance to see if Richard wants to open a further discussion on his report. But first, we've got a couple of questions coming in, one from Councillor Thompson and then Councillor Holdsworth. Councillor Thompson, thank you.
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, thanks very much. And obviously, yeah, it's been a strange meeting with lots of technical issues so far, but we're getting there now. I was just going to kind of start with my example. So, you know, I'm currently a private renter. Obviously, that's, neither here nor there. But our experience over the last kind of year, 18 months has been absolutely mind-blowing. We were living in a flat well, I won't say where it was because obviously, but we were living in a flat and had so many issues. The tenants below us had to leave because their property was unsafe. We had long periods of the water being off. I mean, the boiler basically never worked for the entire year. So it was a case of they came in, and they came in to do an inspection, and the guy who came in said it's way too hot in here. It should not be this hot because there's so much humidity being pumped out into the flat. So obviously we've been looking, and fortunately we've found somewhere else now, and we had a period of about 5 months of living with parents. And then the place we've got now, that was after 8 months of applying. So we had a year in somewhere unsuitable and then 8 months of applying. And in that 8 months, we had one property we applied for, which was £450 a month. I think they told us they had 3 or 4 full days of viewings and applications. And then they took the property down and put it up again for a third higher. So it went from £450 to £600. So they took it down, put it up again, and rejected all the first applicants. So we're very lucky that we've been able to find the place we're in now after so long. And it's, we've got it for at least the foreseeable future. But for me, the massive thing is just how big the demand is. Because we're in a position where actually the first property we looked at was a 1-bedroom flat that probably wasn't big enough for us. And we were having dozens and dozens of applications. And I think part of it is always going to be the Airbnb effect. I think Airbnb has ripped the heart out of the private rented sector because you've got this easier route to more money. It's, well, why would I accept £400 a month when I can get £1,200 a month as a holiday let and be less responsible as a landlord? So I guess ultimately, for me, the biggest thing we have to start to address is that demand, and it's how we get actually people who are holiday letting to get them back into the private rental sector. Because obviously the biggest incentive right now is financial, and it's what can the council do and what can colleagues do to actually look at getting people out of Airbnb. Because actually, what we're discussing as well is the biggest demand for Airbnb is places like the Upper Valley and the more touristy elements of Calderdale. So then you've got people in these areas being priced out of these areas. And you've also got the flip side of that, which is people are not wanting to go into the cheaper rented areas. They're like, well, why would I rent a house out in like Siddle, South Arran, Boothtown, or North Halifax, or other areas? I'm not naming all of them, but why would I rent there when I can go into the Airbnb market, make more money? And it's just, is there anything within the council, within what we do, that can actually begin to address that? Because for me, that's the number one thing. Because at the moment, people are, I mean, we were willing to accept anything just to get into a property. And I'm sure a lot of people are in the same position. Sorry, I've gone on for a while, but it's just obviously personal, but I think that's it. It's getting, for me, the biggest thing to address is getting people out of the Airbnb market and into actually good standard private rentals. So I'll put that out there. Yeah, you raise an interesting point, and don't be frightened about having gone on about it. I mean, that sort of testament is important as well. You know, it's almost a case study. I mean, my daughter in London, that said, she's now finding they're having to bid against against the starting base of what the rental is, and outbid other potential tenants. So it's starting to get out of hand. I don't know if the team wanted to come back, the officers wanted to come back with their thoughts on Councillor Thompson's. Particularly about the Airbnb. I mean, I saw you nodding your head quite a lot there, Heidi. I don't know if you wanted to defer the question or if you wanted to address it.
Yeah. If I may address it, Councillor Dickinson, I mean, first of all, thank you to Councillor Thompson, because I think he put far more eloquently than we could have done the challenges that the residents in Calderdale are facing in terms of accessing the private rented sector at every level of the private rented sector, from the lower sort of local housing allowance rate properties right through to the higher rental cost properties. We are seeing the demand is way far outweighing outstripping the availability of stock. And there are a number of different reasons for that. We've actually looked at the Airbnb situation, and Councillor Thompson's correct in that the Upper Valley does attract more holiday let / Airbnb homes. It is a little bit difficult to get some of the information, but the numbers aren't huge. If you look at across the Upper Valley, we have about 12,000 properties in that area. 167 of them are classed as holiday lets, which is about 1.4% of properties. But that will be higher than it ever has been, and so is shrinking access to some extent. Overall in Calderdale, only 0.4% of properties we believe are holiday lets, and that's below the England average, which would be 1%. And in some areas, for example, in North Yorkshire, it's 2.7%, and in places like Cornwall, it's nearly 5%. But I don't want to underplay that, because it's actually just one of the many different sections and reasons as to why the private rented sector is becoming more challenging to access. Landlords are seeing that there's a demand there, and so they're making the most of that. And, you know, to be fair to private landlords, they are often in it to make a profit. It is a business for many of them. And so we have a role in terms of our influence, and we hope that the private sector landlord liaison officer post that we will have will be able to start some of the conversations that Councillor Thompson has touched upon. But I think it has to be our response has to be broader than just the Airbnb / holiday let situation, because it's far more challenging than that. But it is something that we do need to keep an eye on, particularly in areas like the Upper Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, you've got a follow-up?
Yeah, that's actually far lower than I thought it was. So I was just going to ask, it's probably hard to work it out. I'm just having a quick look now as well, because this seems just on Rightmove at rentals. So we're saying there's 1,000-ish properties, and currently there's 100 up to let. So I think that's, at any one time, there's such a small proportion available. But yeah, for me, that's actually really surprising that Airbnb is as low. But I was wondering, have we noticed that even though it's low, do we think that actually because they're getting so much more, that's actually driven prices up? Is there a correlation there between more Airbnbs driving up prices as well? I know it's hard to tell because the price of everything's gone up, but it would be interesting to see if when we get more of that, it also increases prices because there's more money to be made from it. So if you're a private landlord, you might actually say, well, we can charge more because of this.
Thank you. I don't know if that needed a response.
I think it's one of the things that comes into play. I think the fact that demand has just increased more generally, you know, as people are becoming more cautious because of the cost of living crisis, that they're not perhaps entering the home ownership market and choosing to look at private rented, people are able to pay more. And I think landlords are looking at that and increasing the rents. And as Councillor Thompson said, you know, his experience absolutely echoes that situation. So I think it is a lot of different reasons, but I do think that, you know, profit is an important aspect of why private landlords have their homes and rent them out. But as I say, I don't think it's just the Airbnb situation, but I think it's one of a number of different drivers.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I suppose what I was thinking about was something that Mike had mentioned. I think it was Richard that had raised it around the taxing of rental income that the government is thinking is bringing in, and the effect that might have on landlords. And I was wondering, what you say, you know, you're talking about landlords leaving the sector. Are they just not renting out the houses and just leaving them there to sort of gain capital, just to sort of be their pensions when they sell it, when they need that money? Because I feel that so much needs to change within the housing. We cannot rely as an economy just on houses going up in value, because, you know, look what it's doing to everybody else. You know, it's causing huge social problems. And I just wondered if there was anything in legislation that you think that might prevent this carrying on.
I can partly answer that question from stuff that I've come across incidentally, but I'll then return it to Heidi. But apparently, what's happening is that landlords, if they're not in a suitable Airbnb place for their changing it from tenancy to Airbnb, they're actually selling. And I think the government was actually hoping that by discouraging one house landlords, that they'd lower property prices, but that's the knock-on effect, of course, that it's strangling private rented supply. But yeah, it'd be a good opportunity at this point, that said, to bring in Richard. You know, I guess he's probably got a more knowledgeable an answer than just something I read on the back of a fag packet type thing. So, Richard, to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, thanks for raising that point, Councillor Smith. So we know that there's quite an extensive set of regulations around the private rented sector, plus the changes in the taxation regulations as well, which from national research suggests that lots of smaller landlords are either possibly leaving the properties empty, like you've said, or they're possibly putting the properties on the market, and they may be even being sold to other private landlords with bigger portfolios with sitting tenants possibly, or they could be going for owner occupation. You know, we simply don't know. One of the things that I did try and highlight in my paper was the need for more accurate and better intelligence on the private rented sector. And I think we've got a real opportunity as a local authority to use the council tax function to start gathering some of this. Every time somebody pays a bill, you know, we could be finding out what the tenure is on the property, and then we can use that data to monitor and track changes in tenure splits across the district, you know, and to look at where the greater concentrations of private rented sector properties are. You know, I suspect personally, my gut feeling is that a lot of buy-to-let investors in the housing market have got into areas of lower value, cheaper properties in perhaps some of our more deprived districts. And that can cause further social problems with antisocial behaviour, with more transient tenancies, with tenants coming and going quickly from properties, with bad landlord practices. And that's got implications for all our workers and authority.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Clark. Steph?
Sorry,
yeah.
Councillor Dickinson. I was just going to say it's not really in the landlord's interest to leave the property empty because they have to pay twice as much council tax. So, I would think that if they're a landlord who's got a single property, they're not really going to let it lie because it would cost them a fortune. And the longer they leave it empty, the more council tax they pay. Yeah, that's all I was saying.
Yeah, thank you. That is it makes a lot of common sense. Councillor Smith again.
Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking that on that, I understood that if it was furnished, that you didn't have to pay the additional council tax. Is that not the case? Sorry, don't know, and I'm just asking that out of curiosity, not really relevant, but.
Does anyone know that answer?
I'm not really sure, but I've not heard that, and I've certainly not read it within the council tax.
Heidi might have some wisdom here.
Yes, that what Councillor Smith has said is correct. So if a property is, and I'm not the expert, Richard and his colleagues are the expert. Richard looks frozen on my screen, so which is why I've jumped in. But if a property is furnished, then it can be classed as being tenanted and doesn't attract the premium council tax.
Okay. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, sorry, I'm aware of limited time, and I'm also thinking about kind of the issues I've got in my ward. I do get quite a bit of casework around landlords and rentals, and quite a bit of social housing as well. And I find that actually social housing providers can be quite good at getting back and helping matters. Obviously, often the issue can be with private landlords is actually getting in contact with them because it's through a lettings agency. But I'm thinking, we've obviously started and listened to the Citizens Advice Bureau, and then there's also kind of like our kind of example. And I think, I'm thinking about our example as well. And I'm thinking that, we're pretty well educated, where, like I'm a counsellor and we're engaged, we understand the system, yet still at no point would I say we've ever felt, or at least me personally, I've never felt that empowered to actually challenge a landlord myself. And actually, I think I've got kind of every advantage because I have immediate access to the council, immediate access to, Citizens Advice Bureau and I'm thinking, for us practically is, I think one of the things we've got to look at is kind of that empowering people to actually be able to challenge. And I know, unfortunately, because of the nature of where we're at, it has often got to be through the voluntary sector. But actually, is it a case of we could look at whether it's a place scrutiny meeting or whether it's a working party, could we look at actually putting something together, quite simplistic advice, but something that we can publicise and send out to private renters we are aware of? Because obviously the information is out there, but quite often there's a lack of access, whether it's people who don't go online, which is quite common, people who actually, it's one thing to go out and do all the research yourself, but is there actually methods through which we can provide information to people, just even if it's a case of the simple things like gas safety checks must be carried out, things like that. I'm just wondering if that's something either this scrutiny board can work on or we can look at, and just as even something simple to actually begin to give people, because having the knowledge is everything, but it's so difficult to actually, because the balance of power is always in the favour of the landlord. So it's really hard to kind of break out of that. It's just a thought anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Let's bring Richard Armitage back in since he's got his hand up. Then I've got a question, I think, for Diane Marsh about enforcement. It's something it's a theme, I think, which is going to be recurring. And then I'd like to get Mike to what Mike Dodge wants to come in before I move on to Dom and Julie from Smart Move, if that's okay with everybody. A hand was up, it's disappeared, has it? Oh, it's Richard, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah. Just on that point, Councillor Thompson, just about empowering residents. The government's recently issued a white paper on a fairer private rented sector. And that will provide, hopefully, better conditions and better rights for tenants. But it will also provide better advice and guidance for landlords as well, because it goes both ways. And I know from previous experience that government's issued quite detailed information guides online about how to be a good landlord, and also for tenants about what they should be, the standards they should be complying with in terms of their tenancy agreements too. And if I may just go back to an earlier point which was raised, I think, by Caroline about F&G rated properties. I've included a little graph in my report which panel members may have seen. So we think from the last stock condition survey that was done in Calderdale about 6 years ago now, so it's a little out of date, but based on the energy performance certificate information available at that time, there were 2,300 F&G rated properties in the private rented sector. Now, some of those homes may possibly have had valid exemptions to exclude them from the regulations, but I would have thought that a lot of them are now still being illegally rented unless they've had long-term tenants in. So working with colleagues in environmental health, Dave Dunbar and Diane, we've successfully bidded for £100,000 coming from the government's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to carry out a project this winter on enforcing the minimum energy efficiency standards. So colleagues in environmental health will be leading on that work over the next 6 or 7 months, and that will involve providing advice to tenants, but also providing advice to landlords about how they can perhaps look to improve their energy efficiency ratings of their properties. You know, we know from the health impact assessment that was done as part of the last stock condition survey that poor housing conditions have a significant impact on the tenant's health. We know from the same survey that the level of disrepair and what we call category 1 hazards in the private rented sector that could have severe harm outcomes for their occupants. We know that these are disproportionately higher in the private rented sector. We think 1 in 4 privately rented properties have what we call a Cat 1 hazard. And the main hazards that we see in Calderdale, because of the nature of our construction of our housing stock, you know, as we'll all know, a lot of it was built before 1919. It's very cold, it's solid walled, it's difficult to heat, and it's extremely expensive to insulate. And we know that is contributing to ill health amongst tenants in terms of cold-related illnesses and long-term health conditions. So with that project funding that we've secured through BEES, there's a really good opportunity for us to start driving up standards in the sector in terms of its energy efficiency.
Thank you. It was before I asked Diane the question I have for her. It was this notion of registered landlords and tying it in with the council tax information. I'm going to assume that there's going to be no data protection issues involved in this at this stage. But it was the legislation seems to infer, Richard, I think, that a registration scheme might be put in place. I mean, in your report, you were talking about in some areas registered landlords were disappearing off the face of the earth because of the cost of registration. I mean, it doesn't seem to me to hold a database of landlords would be too difficult or onerous for us to maintain very, very cheaply, would it?
Yeah, I think if I can go into a little more detail, that might be the selective licensing scheme that's been implemented in Leeds that we've been keeping a close eye on. So in Leeds, where they have 2 very deprived wards in Beeston and Holbeck, which panel members may have heard of, the conditions in the private rented sector have been particularly bad, which have caused the council to instigate what we call a selective licence scheme. So that means private landlords to rent property in those areas have to pay fees to be able to do so. Fees in the region of about £400 to £600 per property. And what anecdotal feedback from the Leeds officers has been around the scheme is that this has caused a real problem in terms of property being transferred in ownership to avoid the council tracking the landlord. It's involved examples of property being transferred overseas, again, to make tracing the landlord very difficult. Other landlords have thought, well, I'm not paying that fee. I'm just keeping quiet, keeping my head down. So it's not really tackled the problem of that poor housing condition. And it's had a real impact on the authority in terms of the costs as well. Because they've served that selective licence, they've had to really put investment into staff time, into proactively tracing the landlords and enforcing the fact they've got to sign up. And inevitably, those costs have got to get passed on somewhere as well, possibly through higher rents, possibly to the tenants. So that was just one point I was making in the paper about selective licensing. Councillor Smith, you mentioned a point earlier, didn't you, about registered landlords? I think you might have used the term, or unregistered landlords. Can I just check for Caroline's benefit, was that referring to licensed HMOs, houses in multiple occupation?
Well, I was thinking of both. I mean, I was thinking of them, but I was also thinking of just houses that are let, because there's, the right to let for people, are denied the right to let. If some people who don't have status or, or no recourse to public funds, they might be living in houses that aren't registered as private sector. So I was thinking, and that includes a lot of the sort of HMO type dwellings as well.
Yeah.
So.
And what we see in the sector is that tenure can change very quickly, and some properties may be being let for cash payment, and it's simply just, we don't even see it on our radar. And I think what we need to acknowledge as well is that it's housing in the bottom of the private rented sector market, which is often the cheapest, is often the housing for last resort for some very, very vulnerable people. So it's how we allocate and prioritise our resources to tackle that.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Diane, environmental health, I know, has an enforcement role to play with regard to the poor condition of houses. As I say, I refer to my experience as a gas safe engineer. It is one of those things, whenever I hear about a gas explosion, the first thing I turn the volume up and find out where it is, first of all, because you never want to be too complacent about it. And the key examples really tend to be along the lines of unregistered people doing gas safety work, houses not actually having gas safe certificates, or even gas safe registered engineers doing sloppy jobs because they're not charging enough for the work and therefore being too hasty with it. But the HSE do seem to come down on it and like a ton of bricks. The stories that we were getting from Caroline with regards to some of the stuff that was happening with regard to enforcement seemed to indicate that not a lot was happening. It seemed to be as though it was needed to be driven by the tenant. But I'm just wondering, from an environmental health perspective, in terms of if you see faults that need enforcement, does the council have a role to play in driving through enforcement, even if the tenant wants to take a back seat?
Yes, Chair. Yes, we do. We get lots of service requests, and they come from a whole host of bodies. So it may be the tenants themselves, it may be other bodies such as social services, fire brigade, green doctors. So we do then have a duty to go and assess those hazards. What we first do, however, is we triage, so then we can concentrate on the category 1, potentially category 1 hazards. So we will triage that. That may mean in the first instance, we send a letter, because sometimes the tenants have not even spoken with the landlords. They're not aware of the repairs at the property, because sometimes it's the tenants who've done quite a majority of the damage. So it's having that balance. So through triaging, we give the landlord the opportunity. If through the triage we identify that there is going to be category 1 hazards there, then we go and do a full house inspection. To do a full house inspection, and if that goes to notices, and the assessment itself can take up to two days for an officer to do. It's very heavy paperwork. So we do go out and do those. If we find there's different levels of enforcement action we can take. We can take informal, we can do legal notices. And then if the landlord's still not complying with any legal notices served, we do have this new legislation which came through in 2018 where we can issue civil penalties to landlords. And that starts at a £30,000 fine and works back depending on culpability and a number of other issues which you deduct from. So my colleagues over in Bradford, so if they find an unlicensed HMO, that's a strict offence, and also it can be dealt with a civil penalty. Their civil penalties are coming out at £21,000 fines. And that has to be, that's ring fence for housing, and it's got to stay within the housing. It doesn't go to the whole council. It's got to go back into housing functions. So we do lots of enforcement. It's just a shame we just don't have the resources in environmental health to do to carry out more enforcement, but also more proactive work. So what we are keen on in the future is, if we did proactive work and worked with one letting agent, that might, if we went through their portfolio, that might have an impact on 50 landlords. And then that drives that side of the, that market up, the conditions of the property up.
Smashing, thank you. Yeah, I've got no problem with people making money, but I do have a problem with people making money unfairly, and that's across the board. Right, Mike, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Sharon. And I was quite happy to wait until everyone had had a chance to speak. But I just want to make a couple of points about the process, really. One is to say that Bella and myself did make some efforts both to get some private landlords here this evening and to get some letting agents here. We spoke with Councillor Clark previously to the Calderdale Landlords Association, but they weren't able to attend this evening. And we made several efforts to get letting agents to come for this discussion. So I wonder whether, and I think members have already alluded to this, there's more work to be done after this meeting, because I think Councillor Clark made the point that there are lots of problems that people like Diane and Caroline have talked about, and I'm absolutely right, but there also are issues about the supply that Councillor Thompson talked about. There's a broader issue as well. So I think that perhaps there is some work to do, if members agree, after this discussion, which I think, apart from the stop-starts nature to the discussion, has been very useful. It's one of those bits of scrutiny work, Chair, where officers, scrutiny members, and Cabinet, and I should say Councillor Patient, this is his portfolio. He's not well this evening, which is why he's not here. So he sent his apologies, and he did want to be here for this discussion. But it's one where, if you like, everyone's on the same side, but lifting the lid and then raising the profile of the issue, I think will be really positive. And we will write a report after this discussion, and we will shamelessly steal from Richard Armitage's report and the other reports that we've had as well, because I think we've received some really powerful information. Thank you, Chair.
Agreed. Thank you. I'd like to bring in Dominic Furby and Julie from Smart Move. Welcome. Would you like to introduce yourselves and give us a bit of background?
Yeah, obviously Calderdale Smart Move. We are a charity that support the homeless and vulnerable across Calderdale. We cover the whole of Calderdale. We work with private rented and social housing. We deal with adults and families. We've discussed, obviously, we've looked at the papers that everybody's been talking about tonight, and it's really interesting to hear, the points of views and the challenges that you all have and that we have on a daily basis. Neil, who sat alongside me, and you can see Julie, Neil's our housing support officer, deals with all the landlords, the private landlords, social housing. Julie will probably come in, who's our office manager. We deal with roughly about 450 clients And a client can be an individual, a family, mum, dad, somebody coming out of prison, asylum seekers. We deal with absolutely everybody. We work very closely with Heidi, and Heidi's a fantastic person that we work alongside across the whole of Calderdale. The problems that we've just been talking about, me and Neil were saying that obviously we struggle with private landlords. Probably years ago, my previous role, I was a district commander in Calderdale in the Fire and Rescue Service, and I know what with the environmental services, with what Diane said, the problems that you have with properties. I've worked very closely with Holly Lynch at various, properties and private, landlords, and the problems that we have with landlords. But there's a two-way thing, and it's very interesting to Stephanie right at the start of the conversation that there's a two-way problem here. Yes, the landlords. We do have problems, but they're not all bad. Landlords are not all bad. They have a lot of problems that they have to deal with quite a lot of clients that we deal with. Talking to Neil and just speaking to Julie before we came on today, we struggle to house under 35. Would you agree? Yeah, because most of our clients are vulnerable. They don't have the economical backing or the monetary backing to go into a lot of the properties. Like Heidi rightly says, quite a lot of the landlords, they can go for the people or the families that are more affluent, and they will get more money. So we struggle with getting properties across the board, and I think Julie will confirm this, that we don't have the landlords and the private landlords what we used to have. Neil's just been saying to me privately before we came on that a lot of the landlords now are selling the properties, not that they don't want to, they don't need to do, they don't need the problems that are out there with some of the clients that are out there, that some of the clients, one, don't pay the rent. COVID didn't help. Obviously, some of them, they got the rent, and I don't think Heidi will say this, and then they spent the money, not on the rent. So there's a lot of problems that we had with some of our clients. So there's a two-way thing here, councillor. It's not just about not enough properties. There's a problem with sometimes some of the clients that we work with that they do not pay the bills. They do not pay, for the rent. They will use it for other means.
Some landlords won't house our clients as well. So some won't house them, and some of the clients won't live where we show them. Maybe it's in the wrong area, or they just don't like what they've seen. But at the moment, like I said, they're very thin on the ground, and to get the client into it takes quite a bit of work sometimes between the landlord, myself, and the client.
And I do like the fact that what Heidi's saying, having a housing liaison officer, you're basically Neil's in the middle, working with the landlord and working with the client to make sure that we match it up. And Julie can sort of reiterate the things that we're talking about here. I don't know if you want to add anything, Julie.
Yeah, well, I've got that written down that we can see it from both sides, actually, because, we are support workers, but we do work with the landlords as well. So we can see, issues the landlords have, but we can also see issues the clients have as well. I mean, like we've just touched upon, our problem is trying to find good condition, reasonable, suitable housing for people who are under 35 with the rate of that local housing allowance that they're allowed and that they're entitled to. Because what they're entitled to, there is not any stock out there for the amount of money that they've got. So there isn't a choice really the way, we don't have a choice of where we can put people, because it is what's available, the price, what they're entitled to. And then and I totally get somebody mentioned earlier about it not, people's mental health. And I've been into some properties where I thought, and to me it's sad because, my conviction is with the clients, always has been and always will be. And I just think it is sad that we haven't got a choice. And I know sometimes some of them, they've had all the choices in the world. They come to us and we're last chance saloon because, they've burnt all the bridges, so to speak. But I do think we are lacking really in some decent housing for the young people. And I think it's the young people we need to be looking at, because 9 times out of 10, it's the young people that we're finding on our bridges and within Calderdale, because of the mental health, for whatever reasons are going on with them. And then with the housing stock as well, it's quite a sad situation to be in.
I mean, we're fortunate, councillor, that we have a 96% success rate as a charity, that our clients sustain a tenancy for 12 months. Now that's a national statistic that we have, that we feed back into the council. So a 96% success rate for our clients to stay in a tenancy. But that's a lot of work to make sure, one, they pay the bills. One, we work with the landlord. We also do a paper bond scheme. So we obviously, if they do damage the property, we then have to support the repairs or anything to that property. Well, if you don't have Smart Move or any other organisation like Heidi works with and things like this, that then it can fall down. Like the Citizens Advice Bureau said, they have lots of people that come to them, but there's a lot of people that they've probably missed, that haven't gone to the Citizen Advice Bureau, that have just left a property in ill repair, or a tenant or a landlord hasn't maintained that property, and people have been forced out. So there's a lot of problems. Obviously, there's a two-way thing here. One, we haven't got enough housing stock. Is that correct, Julie? But also some of our younger clients, we really struggle to get them into properties. For one, they haven't got the funds, and they haven't got the cash to pay.
I'd just like to say as well that the majority of claims on our bonds is not due to damage, it is due to unpaid rent. Again, for us as a housing support service, the universal credit and money going direct to clients has not helped our case at all. It's not, even some of the clients, when it first came about, they were so scared and so worried. They were coming in, can I give you my money because I know I'm going to spend it, and we can't take money. So there's a lot gone on in such a short amount of time for people to get used to. And then obviously we've had the pandemic, trying to get in to see people now and how they're living and stuff. People are still living on the back of the pandemic, where they're still a bit, uneasy about seeing people, and they won't come out to us and we can't get into them. So it's quite difficult times at the moment with a lot going on.
Thank you. Yes, I'll bring you in just a moment, Councillor Thompson, if that's okay. My initial reflection was that change. It was a long time ago now, I think, when the money used to go direct to landlords for their rent, which gave them an amount of security to, I think it was, I can't remember what the motivation was, whether it was a test case or whether it was a change of philosophy that meant the money went directly to the tenants. I suspect also it ties in with the homelessness as well, with your work, Nicola. I don't know if you wanted to say a few words. I don't want to disregard the hands that are up at the moment, but I just wanted to gather your thoughts for a few minutes before I address the councillors' questions.
Yeah, it's certainly challenging times at the moment. It's impacting sort of our work. We're seeing people in temporary accommodation for sort of longer periods of time, when they can't access social housing and their only option is the private sector. And what we're seeing is people with certainly more complex needs. And yeah, it's certainly a challenge to get people into the private sector. Certainly we're trying to strengthen the work we're doing with landlords with that creation of the new post. That will certainly help us to build sort of our portfolio and to help people to access the private sector moving forward. But I think I support everything that Smart Move is saying. Things that we see both sides of the coin with the work that we're doing to support the clients that we are, but also trying to support landlords as well.
Excuse me. Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you. This is a bit of a, it's really difficult. And I think obviously long term, I think one of the biggest answers is going to be getting that good quality social housing in, but obviously and also getting the local housing allowance to go up, but that's not, unfortunately, within our remit. Just the local housing allowance locally, it's something that I think Councillor Foster's raised quite a bit. And just, I mean, if you look on something like Rightmove, at the moment, there's currently one property in Calderdale where the local housing allowance would cover it. So that's, there's already a massive disparity in the amount you're actually bringing in and the amount you're being charged. I was just going to ask about you know, the kind of clients that we're getting and people with those additional needs. And we now finding that, you know, due to the kind of availability of housing, and we're getting more people with, you know, difficult circumstances and additional needs ending up in the private rental sector. And is that increasing quite a lot? Because obviously the private rental sector is by its nature more insecure. And are we finding that actually by those clients ending up in the private rental sector, is that making outcomes worse as well because of, as opposed to being in social housing? Is it actually worse going into the private rental sector?
I think, sorry, I think with regard to that, it's where the private rental sector, it's where the properties are. And they're all deemed to be in certain areas, and they're all like for like, and 90% of the clients that come through our door, I can't talk about everybody else, but come through our door, they are vulnerable. You know, they've all got issues, they've all got stories to tell, they've all gone through stuff that, you know, you just wouldn't want to think of. And again, we feel bad sometimes because we're, you know, the only places that we can place people that are affordable to them are sometimes, you know, we do think, oh God, well, we can't put them there because we're putting them at risk. But if we don't put them there, there is nowhere else to put them. And it's, you know, it's a really difficult one. And we work quite closely with temp, and it's you know, do we leave somebody in temporary accommodation for longer till we wait and find something that we think is more suitable for that person, or do we take them out of temp and place them in somewhere and just hope that within 6 months we can find somewhere better or a different area or something where they're not, we don't feel that they're at that risk.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Holdsworth.
Oh, thanks, Chair. This is just a slightly different question. Julian Dom made the point, as I think has been made throughout the evening, that one of the problems is the lack of housing within the area. Do you think there's any likelihood that the expansion of housing driven by the local plan might expand the rental market? Or is that unlikely because of the type of housing that may well be built?
I think you're right there, Councillor. It's a type of housing that's going to be built and what can be, you know, paid for rent. If you're going to buy 3-4 bedroom properties, you are not going to get the clients that we're talking about, the ones that are really vulnerable, that really need that support. I think Heidi would probably back that up as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm aware that Sheila O'Neill and Hayden Waters want to come in as Mike, in fact. Oh, crikey, everyone wants to come in. But I'll let Audrey, sorry, Councillor Smith have a question first, and then I'll come to the officers, if that's okay. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, the officers have probably got the answer to this anyway, but are there no models in other areas that are looking at councils taking on a sort of management by proxy sort of role with these houses that are at the lower end, to try and offer that reassurance to the landlord, a bit like what SmartMove, but to offer that reassurance to the landlords, but maybe try sort of almost like private sector social housing, because it is, you know, so to make sure it's safe, make sure it's affordable, make sure it's compliant, but maybe slightly reducing the risk to the landlord. I don't know. Are there any sort of models out there of where the council is supporting private sector to sort of get better cheap housing where it's needed?
Interesting question. Some sort of indemnity scheme, perhaps, for approved landlords. Does anyone want to take that one up to answer? Yeah, Richard would. Yeah, it looks like Richard wants to have a go.
Sorry, take myself off mute. Thank you. Yeah, we are aware of councils in the southeast that have set up and established social letting agencies. but they're dealing with a very different and a much more expensive private rented sector market, and the model's quite different. And it might be that once the private landlord liaison officer is in post, this is something that they could perhaps look at in terms of gathering some information, intelligence on the market and the sector, and to perhaps inform or start to build a basic sort of business plan for future consideration. But we need to look at local housing allowance levels, rent levels, and just see how it all stacks up. And of course, we can try and get some more research for Mike's report on the private rented sector, which might be helpful to include in terms of that as an option going forward.
Thank you. Right then, so Sheila O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. I just wanted to reinforce the importance of the local plan and the allocations within the local plan and the work that we're doing across a number of teams to increase the delivery of housing. So Heidi, colleagues in planning colleagues in highways and other teams, making sure that we've got more houses being built. We've under-delivered, we know this, we've had reports here to Scrutiny before for a number of years. So we have a backlog of housing to build and replace. And I think what that does is there are a number of impacts that has. One is we increase the number of houses available in the market, whether that be social housing or private rented sector or owner-occupied housing. But it also creates churn in the market, if you like. So it gives that opportunity for reinvestment in the existing stock. You've got to remember that the stock in Calderdale is very particular. We have a possibly oversupply, if you like, of some of the pre-1919 stone properties that are harder to heat and treat for energy efficiency and so on. So we've got a very particular kind of problem in Calderdale that needs a very particular response. So I think the message I would like to give that's not really come through tonight is that what we really want for the people of Calderdale is choice, so that people who live here and people who want to come and live here have a choice of property, they have a choice of tenure. And so we need to make sure that we're building the right houses in the right locations. So the work that the teams have done on the housing strategy is absolutely underpinning the work that we're doing at the moment, working with social housing providers, working with landowners, working with house builders and developers to make sure that they're bringing forward properties and developments that meet the needs of all our communities now and into the future. And I think the other thing I would like to impress upon the committee is that we do have to meet the needs of the vulnerable, and we do have to ensure that housing of last resort, however undesirable it is actually at the moment, is an essential provision actually for some of those people. And we've talked about some of the difficulties that those tenants have and that they create for other tenants in those buildings, but also for the landlords. But the underpinning kind of link, I guess, is the work that we do in the Directorate and across the council and with partners around the links to the economy and economic growth, that the best thing that we can do for people is give them a better opportunity to have economically active lives where they can participate fully, where they can earn a good living, where they can get a good education and they can bring their families up well to succeed and achieve whatever that looks like. So I think I would hate for us to miss that link to that importance of economic growth and life chances for people to live healthy, productive lives. And I'm sure Debs will want to say more about the links to wellbeing. And we know, and we talk an awful lot about the links between health and housing. It's absolutely critical, but health, housing and happiness, I think that's what we really want to see. We want our people to be living really good, healthy, happy lives in Calderdale. So new housing is part of that story. Our existing housing is part of that story. And we have to work with all our partners to achieve that. But I would think it's so important that we do not lose sight of the fact that what we want is for people to be thriving and not just getting by. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sheila, which is a very nice, neat segue straight on to Deborah Harkins, who's next on the list anyway. So nicely played.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to sort of reiterate what a really important discussion this is and what an incredibly important the housing market generally and the private rented sector. I mean, I'm the Director of Public Health and the lead director for the climate emergency and climate and tackling climate change. And actually, this is really, really important in relation to both of those. colleagues have talked about the links between housing and health, and unfortunately poor housing, you know, does have a significant impact on people's health, but also carbon emissions actually as well. So this is really, really important. Chair, what I initially put my hand up to suggest, actually, because this is such an important conversation and really rich actually conversation, it's great to hear from the different voices as well and the different partners involved in this. What I was going to suggest is, with the time that we're on at sort of 7:45, I guess, at the moment, and we've got the item on the climate action work, my suggestion was going to be that we actually put that forward for a future meeting, carry on this so there's time to carry on this conversation and look at the forward plan, but also so that we can give the climate action conversation the time it deserves as well. And and I think the other thing I would say about this item that we're talking about now is just that importance, as Councillor Clark said right at the beginning, in relation to those 3 priorities that we've got as an organisation around climate change, tackling inequalities, and actually thriving towns and regeneration, as Sheila talked about. So it was just to suggest that, Chair, really, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I think it would probably help us out. I've been having this conversation a little bit earlier on with Mike anyway. Because Councillor Patient can't make it this evening, we were going to initially have that conversation about the report, but in acknowledgement of the amount of work that he's been putting into it, I think it would be better if we did, picked up on that and moved it on to the September meeting. The suggestion has been that in the September meeting was going to be talking about the issue with the travellers and sites for them. And that particular discussion, those particular discussion points, and move that one onto the October meeting. But I was going to sort of mention that with regard to the work programme. But yeah, point taken. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a very good suggestion by Debs, because the climate emergency plans are very, very important, and we can't sort of wrap that up in 5 or 10 minutes. So I think we should defer that item until the next meeting.
No, I'm with you on that one. In order to do it justice as well, I mean, I'd be quite happy to stay here till 9 o'clock, but I'm not sure everyone else would. Yeah, likewise. I'd cheese on toast just before the meeting, so I can go for a bit longer yet. But Deb, did you want to come back in again? Sorry.
If I may, Chair, just another sort of another thing that's just popped into my head in terms of the potentially having the conversation about the climate action work in September, is we'll have launched our consultation on the climate action plan at that point. So the discussion that we're having you have on that scrutiny panel could actually form part of the panels and the committee's response to the consultation on the climate action plan as well, if that helps with that decision as well.
Potentially. The issue that I was discussing with Councillor Smith a bit earlier on was the length of the consultation period, ironically. That may affect things. Sorry, I'm just going to take a small time out here with regard to this, because I did want to bring in Diane Marsh again, assuming that Richard had said everything that he wanted to say about his particular report. Yeah, great. That's helpful. Thank you. It's a really good report, by the way. Thank you. Audrey, sorry, Councillor Smith, we were talking a little bit earlier on about the actual timescale. Now, it seems as though the consultation for the climate action plan is going to be launched earlier than that, earlier than the meeting in September. So, how do you want to approach this?
I suppose, just having read the article for tonight's meeting, I looked at some of the comments that were raised around making sure the consultation was, useful and meaningful to all sectors of our community. And I sort of thought we were using this meeting to make suggestions as to how we could best do that, how we could, have a wider reach. And so I'd suggested to Councillor Dickinson that we extended the consultation period, but I don't know. I mean, obviously, I am not on the working group, and that is entirely,
right. right, in that case, we'll have a couple of minutes on this because I think it is important as well. That the board makes a recommendation with regards to that. So we'll come back to if Debbie might be worthwhile hanging around after we finish this bit. But yeah, so we'll very briefly come back to that because consultation is key and meaningful consultation too. Right. We have discussed a little bit earlier on with regards to environmental health. And I've got you down, Diane, on as down to speak a bit more as well. I mean, was there more that you wanted to bring to the table in that regard?
I did provide a few slides. I don't know if they're available.
I'll be honest, I've not actually seen them, but I don't know if it'd be an opportunity to share them.
Okay.
They have been circulated, but
they have been circulated.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen them.
Right. So it's really just to let you know what environmental health do when we're doing our enforcement and housing inspections. So we don't just inspect private rented, we do owner occupiers as well. And from that, we tend to find that there's at least 20% of the properties have a category 1. When you go into the private rented sector, that increases to 26% of properties which have a category 1 hazard. The sort of works we do look at are disrepair, overcrowding, HMO licence, and advice to landlords and Homes for Ukraine. We find a lot of common hazards and fire, falls, excess cold, damp and mold, and electricity, and overcrowding is quite a big one as well. I've been to properties where you've got parents with 6 children live in a 2-bedroom house. So you can just imagine the conditions. I'd just like to reiterate what my colleagues have said. It is a two-way coin. Some tenants are very problematic. They won't let the landlord in to do the works. And that it brings up barriers. So you've got landlords wanting to do works, but the tenants won't let them in. And that's fundamentally down to breakdown in relationships. And it's quite hard to liaise with the tenant and landlord to get the works progressing. I think that's about it, really.
I've got a question myself, just in case other members wanted to scratch their heads and if they wanted to ask you anything as well. Twofold, really. You mentioned a bit earlier on in terms of a wish list of things that you want to do. I mean, that kind of infers that you don't have sufficient resources, or do you, to address all the issues? And the second question really is the quality of homes in Calderdale, and how would you say that it would compare with neighbouring authorities or within our comparators?
Okay, to answer your first one, Chair, resources. There's definitely a huge mismatch between service demand and resources. So, for an example, in environmental health, we have in the team I'm the senior in, there's actually 3 of us, and we don't just do housing, we do a whole host of things. So we've probably got 1 full-time equivalent doing housing. If I do that as a comparison to other councils, you've got Bradford, who have 15 full-time officers doing housing. St Helens have 5. Craven, which is a quarter of the size of ours, has 3.5 officers solely dealing with housing and HMOs. So there is definitely a huge mismatch between service demand, what's coming in, and office, resources. The second thing you asked for, sorry.
Yes, in terms of the general housing stock and the issues that you come across with borrowers of similar size and outlook and what have you.
I've worked in a larger authority, but that was more of a city, so it's not really comparison. Generally, what we do find that the landlords in Calderdale are responsive. We do have the whole handful of rogue, as we would call them, potentially rogue landlords who are just totally dismissive of their responsibilities. but generally the landlords are responsive. What I do find a lot with landlords is, though, even the good ones or moderate ones, is that they're not aware of what they need. It's misinformation out there. They think that they're complying with legislation if they just do the carbon monoxide regulations. But when you bring in the Housing Act, you need a different standard. And they just do. There's a lot of misunderstanding and miseducation with landlords.
Yes, thank you. Members, any questions? Okie dokie.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to sort of bring this phase of it to a close at this point. Very clearly, there's more work to be done. We've definitely heard from the tenant side of it. It's been quite eye-opening, actually. And I suspect the reason that landlords aren't coming along is they may feel as though they're going to be scapegoated, perhaps, or made to feel at fault, which isn't always the case. So I'm wondering if representatives, so for example, the way that Mike's been trying to get hold of the likes of estate agents who do tenancy management and that sort of thing would be see if we can mine that one a little bit more, perhaps. But I think at this stage, I'm happy to draw that one to a close unless there's anything else that any members want to bring to bear. It's been a very useful discussion, despite the fact it's been all upside down, and certainly very interesting. I guess this is what happens when you put me in charge, really. There we go, that's another story. So if I could please, would it be possible to move on very briefly, because I know it's 5 to 8 now, and I would like to move on to the work programme in a little bit more detail, and say good night to the officers who and thank you to our guests as well for being here. With regard to the climate report, and I think I particularly want to focus in on the point that Councillor Smith raised about the length of the consultation period. There was a workshop fairly recently, and I did actually make a point about having a longer consultation period. I don't quite recall how long I talked about it, but 8 weeks has been offered. Debs, you were there at that meeting. Was that the default that was accepted at the time? Because I do remember coming away satisfied with the extension that I'd asked for. Was it refresh my memory for me.
Yeah, absolutely. The climate partnership had a conversation about the consultation and about the length of the consultation, and initially we were thinking it would be around a month, but we absolutely heard very loud and clear from partners, from councillors and partners, that it needed to be double that. So we were looking at an 8-week, a 2-month consultation period. So that is the intention, and it's the intention. It's all dependent on the design of the fabulous work our comms team are doing, designing the documents. But the intention is that the consultation will be sort of launched towards the end of August, and then we'll run for a sort of 8-week, 2-month period of time.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for refreshing my memory. So initially, so if you're for information, Councillor Smith and other members, it was, it seems as though it was 4 weeks, and now up to 8 weeks, 2 months. I'd like to invite discussion if anyone wants to contribute. Yeah, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I suppose, the time of the consultation doesn't really matter so much. It's just the quality of it, and I just feel happy that we've got in place enough sort of different methods of consulting and enough sort of workshops, and I really would think, I'd like to hear that we've got sort of face-to-face consultation, because that does produce a different set of results. I'm convinced.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I'm conscious that it's kind of us three raising a similar point. around consultations. Yeah, again, similarly, but again, I think just similarly to what Audrey's saying, there's always that concern with consultations that there are the people that are always engaged will always be engaged. So we you know, with any consultation, there's those who are already interested will engage, and it's just, again, wanting to raise the point that we need to try and engage with those that aren't particularly interested at all. I know it's something that's been done quite effectively in terms of the elections with like the pop-ups in the market and things like that, but it's just, again, what, you know, for me, the biggest people you want to hear from are the people that don't really care, because they often the most different perspective to, and I just think that's really important.
Thank you. Sam, welcome.
Yeah, just to come back on that point, because I think that's something really important. It's something we talked about internally. So there'll be the kind of usual online questionnaire and a discussion pack that people can take away and look at and come back to us, but we definitely do want to do those face-to-face events. And we talked about doing like a kind of climate consultation, but I think we're sort of steering away from that idea, because it's quite likely that the community groups that are already into climate and the people that are coming already into climate will come and maybe be part of that discussion, but we'll hear fewer of those voices of people that haven't been part of the discussion already. So what we really want to try and do is prioritise spending officer time going out and visiting existing community groups that are diverse, where people are coming to talk about local issues and actually talk to people where they're at. So if people have suggestions for any groups like that I think are particularly representative or interesting, would really love to hear your suggestions for groups we can go to in September or October, maybe pre-existing events, pre-existing community groups that we should go and make touch with. Please do let me know. We're gathering together lots of suggestions at the moment, and I'd love to hear yours.
Thank you very much, Sam. Just a quick one. When does the consultation start officially?
So depending on the design work, it'll either be week commencing 29th of August or the following week, the first week of September. That's the target date. So we're looking at a consultation closing, I suppose, end of October. So the September-October period.
Thank you, which means it'll have pretty much only just started by the time we meet to discuss the item in more detail in September anyway. I hope that reassures folk there, but I've got Councillor Smith and Councillor Young. I'd like to invite you both in, and then we can draw that one to a very hasty close. I'm very sorry. And then we can discuss the work programme before we call it a day, if that's okay. Councillor Smith.
I know what Councillor Young's going to say. No, I'm joking. I was just gonna ask about you said about officers going out and doing the consultation in the communities. Have we got no capacity for it to be a sort of peer-led sort of consultation, so that it could be, you know, more of a sort of, I don't know, a more equal discussion rather than it be?
Absolutely. If you want me to just answer quickly, sorry, I've still got my hand up.
Yes.
Yes, there'll be sort of a resource pack, and actually something I should have mentioned, and apologies, is that we really want the Climate Action Partnership, and indeed, you know, to ask councils or anyone else who has community links, if you would be willing to go and have discussions with people and feedback. We'll have a resource pack full of information and guidance, and we'd be happy to provide support for people to have that type of discussion. So that would be brilliant if anyone would be willing to get involved with that.
Thank you, Sam. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a suggestion to Sam, actually. What about the ward forums? They happen to know the wards, and I'm sure you'd be welcome at the Calder Ward Forum, which is my ward. And we have a meeting, I think, in the first week of October.
Thank you. I'll take that back.
Get in touch with Jay Campbell.
Okay.
Yeah, great suggestion, actually. Right. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, officers. It's been a very interesting evening, and sorry for the environmental guys to have to wait for so long for so little. But thank you very much indeed for your attendance. It is. I'm sure we all are grateful for it. Thank you very much indeed. Right, folks, the work programme. So, as we've discussed, is this normally still live, or does it normally come off live?
No, this is still live, Chair.
No, that's not, yeah, okay. So we did have the item on travellers for September. The proposal has been that we're going to move that to October so that we can accommodate the environmental, I'm starting to lose my words now. The environmental aspect that Councillor Patient will be presenting. Yeah, I'm sure he'll be in fighting fit for that one. So just to make sure that we're all on board with that, I think it makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, double down, make sure you read that report. It is important. It is our future we're talking about. Mike.
Thank you. Well, I think that covers it partly. So September, if we go with that, we'll be doing the climate report. I think we've put something down on recruitment, retention and training, but we actually made a reference to strategy and performance on that. So that aspect is being picked up with Jackie Addison in September at strategy and performance. I think actually, unless members profoundly disagree, that's been covered in an authority-wide issue at strategy and performance. So we would have the weave item and the climate in September, and the planning update from Richard Seaman and Sheila, and the Gypsy Roma and Traveller sites issue in October. But I think before we finish, Chair, just to ask whether any members have got any issues to raise about the work programme, because I know one member, Councillor Thompson, I think, has contacted me about one issue.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, so we were, and I think it's something that myself and Councillor Smith have discussed, is that after the post-16 transport changes are implemented, it would be useful if we could look at that in terms of impact. For a bit of background for those who aren't aware, there's been changes to post-16 transport for children with special educational needs. So it's just, there's obviously going to be a big impact from that, and I think we were keen to look at that here to see what the impact would be.
Yes, I think that would be an interesting one. It's not really an interest to declare, but my eldest daughter was SEN when she was at school, but that's a different bag of bits altogether. So I think that would be a one to, where would you be proposing to squeeze that one onto the agenda?
I guess that's the difficult bit, isn't it?
Councillor Holsworth and Councillor Smith. Oh, sorry, Mark, you're on mute still.
Bella and I will take that away and come up with a proposal for a timetable for that.
Okay, Councillor Holsworth.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Chair, and Councillor Thompson, if the point about the change to post-16 transport support for those with special needs is something we could look at in the cost of living crisis group, rather than place in its broader sense. Would that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think with it, I'm not sure really. I can see what Audrey thinks, Councillor Smith, just purely because, yeah, I'm worried that, the scrutiny boards might have more, we might have a bit more impact if we make recommendations, or if we have anything to kind of feedback to Cabinet and elsewhere on it. I'm not sure really.
Not 100% sure how it would tie in with the cost of living crisis when it's a wider provision, apart from the fact that it adds an extra burden on withdrawal of the service to those families with children effectively in further education post 16 with SEN. Interesting. Well, yes, Mike. Sorry, before I bring in Councillor Smith.
I would suggest keeping it on this. I mean, it's. Some months ago, we had a discussion, and Councillor Smith and I visited the transport depot about transport, and this was one of the issues that came from the transport side of things. So I think it would be probably a proper follow-up from that discussion.
That would make sense.
A while back.
Yeah, I mean, with all respect to you, so Councillor Holsworth, I'm not convinced that it would tie in terribly well with the cost of living.
It may be interesting. it would get swamped with other issues.
Yeah, I think we're talking about is a service provision which would affect us in place more than anything else, I think. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I agree. Just to say that I think that item on the post-16 travel was kind of a little bit snuck in to the report, and I don't think it was given as much scrutiny as it maybe deserved. And following that, I did have discussions with Councillor Lynn and Councillor Wilkinson, and we said that they would provide a report, on the impact, on the social and economic impact of people, families that have been affected by it, and they suggested October. So I don't know if that's any good, if we can, but they did make that suggestion. They did say that they would come back and have a look at it. So I think it really needs to get a bit more priority, and I think we do need to give it a good airing on scrutiny. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Everyone content? Anyone else, anything else to say? Right, okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been a very interesting evening. I'd love to get a fuller picture, because I know for a fact from my own experience that the landlord story can be quite different as well. In the meantime, we shall see you in September. Take good care of yourselves. I think that's it, isn't it? Oh, sorry, there is one more formal thing I do need to do, and that is to repeat for formal processes that items number 1 to 4 on the agenda were approved and agreed. The amendments to the minutes with regard to the call-in were agreed as well, the adjustments to those. And also finally, again, to apologise to everyone, both here and at home, for the technical issues that we've suffered this evening. Very much sounded like it was completely out of the control of everybody. And so, yeah, thanks to the officers for rescuing us in the end. Right.